The psychology of the ignored child. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. In today's video on the psychology of the ignored child, we explore how childhood silence shapes adult self-worth, emotional patterns, and the way we move through the world. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or unsure whether you deserve attention, this message will help you understand why, and more importantly, how to reclaim your inner power. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own journey and consider how these principles can bring more healing, growth, and happiness into your daily life. And before we dive deep, let me know in the comments, have you ever felt ignored during childhood? And how has it shaped you today? Your voice matters here on Spiritual Wisdom. 1. Early neglect wires the brain to expect rejection. Early neglect wires the brain to expect rejection, shaping a child's inner world long before they have the words to describe their pain. When a child is consistently ignored, their nervous system adapts to emotional scarcity, training them to survive without the warmth, presence, or acknowledgement that every developing mind needs. They begin forming what psychologists call an internalized neglect schema, a deep belief that their needs are burdens, their feelings are inconvenient, and their existence takes up too much space. This belief is not chosen, it is absorbed through repeated silence. Every unanswered cry, every moment of emotional absence becomes a quiet lesson written into the child's identity. Stay small. Stay quiet. Do not expect to be seen. As these experiences repeat, the child learns that reaching out leads to disappointment, so they retreat inward, carrying a fear that their voice will always be dismissed. They grow into adults who anticipate rejection even in safe environments, walking into rooms as though they must shrink, entering relationships with the instinct to tiptoe around their own needs, and doubting their worth even when they accomplish something meaningful. Instead of feeling proud, they wait for their success to be overlooked because invisibility feels familiar, almost natural. This emotional blueprint becomes their unconscious map for navigating life. It shapes their friendships, influences their romantic choices, and determines the level of love they allow themselves to receive. Yet beneath this pattern lies a spiritual truth that echoes through many teachings on spirituality and spiritual awakening. The child did not become silent because they lacked value, but because silence was the safest response to a world that did not know how to hold them. Their sensitivity, depth, intuition, and emotional awareness qualities that could have blossomed in a nurturing environment became internal shadows they learned to hide. What they perceive as flaws or weaknesses are often the very signs of a soul that feels deeply, observes quietly, and carries an inner richness that was never mirrored back to them in childhood. On the path of healing, adults who were ignored as children begin to notice how this early neglect still echoes through their choices. They may avoid asking for help, fearing they will be dismissed. They may downplay their emotions, believing they are too much. They may struggle with vulnerability because being unseen taught them to guard their inner world fiercely. But as they grow more aware of these patterns, they realize that their silence was a survival strategy, not a reflection of their worth. This awareness becomes a turning point, a moment when the soul begins to remember itself. And this remembering is the essence of spiritual awakening. It is the slow, gentle process of reclaiming the voice they were forced to hide, allowing themselves to take up space, and understanding that being seen is not a luxury, but a human need. It is the shift from believing my needs are burdens to recognizing my needs are valid. It is the transformation from invisibility into presence. When they finally see that the neglect they endured was never a measure of their value, they begin to heal the silent wounds that shaped them and step into a life where they are allowed to speak, to feel, and to be fully seen. If this message speaks to your heart and you're ready to break the cycle of early rejection, repeat after me. I deserve love. I deserve attention. And I am rewriting my story today. 2. Emotional neglect leaves invisible wounds that shape adulthood. Emotional neglect leaves invisible wounds that quietly shape the way you move through the world. Because when a child grows up unheard and unseen, they learn to survive by dimming their own light, minimizing their needs, and convincing themselves that silence is safer than honesty. Unlike physical abuse, emotional neglect often goes unnoticed, but is just as damaging, and you may carry its impact without realizing that the anxiety you feel, the low self-worth that shadows your confidence, or the disconnection you sense in relationships, all trace back to those early moments when your emotions were dismissed. As a child, you taught yourself to become small, not because you lacked strength, but because no one showed you that your feelings mattered. And so you adapted by hiding your true self, suppressing your needs, and building an inner world where expressing emotion felt like a burden. Over time, this becomes a deep pattern, a quiet script your mind learned to follow, telling you that wanting care is asking too much, that speaking up is risky, and that your presence should take up as little space as possible. And as you grow older, that early silence becomes a form of armor, one that makes you second-guess your worth, apologize too often, or pull away the moment someone tries to get close. Carl Jung captured this truth when he said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because acceptance feels terrifying for someone who was taught through neglect to hide their own heart." You might feel uncomfortable when someone finally pays attention to you, not because you don't want connection, but because your nervous system was trained to expect neglect, not care. This pattern doesn't mean you are broken. It means you adapted to survive. It means your body learned to shut down rather than risk more disappointment. And your mind learned to stay quiet because it was safer than hoping for something better. Yet this awareness becomes the beginning of spirituality and spiritual development, a gentle return to the parts of yourself you once abandoned just to make it through. The numbness you sometimes feel isn't the absence of emotion. It's the shield you built to protect a heart no one protected for you. But now, as an adult, you can begin to soften that shield, to listen to the emotions you used to silence, and to give yourself the understanding you never received. You can learn to speak your needs without shame, to choose relationships where you are truly seen, and to trust that your feelings deserve space. Healing emotional neglect is not about blaming the past. It is about rewriting the inner script that tells you you're too much, too needy, or too sensitive. It is about replacing self-doubt with self-compassion, replacing fear with awareness, and allowing spirituality to guide you back to your own worth. And as you keep walking this path, Remember the quiet lessons you were never taught, that your emotions are valid even when others ignored them, that needing connection does not make you a burden, that your voice deserves to be heard, and that every step you take toward emotional honesty is a step toward becoming whole again. 3. Being unseen disrupts identity formation. Being unseen quietly disrupts the very core of identity formation, because when a child grows up without emotional mirroring, they are left wandering through their inner world without a compass, unsure of who they are and unsure of how to interpret what they feel. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Yet an ignored child never even gets the chance to meet themselves fully, because no one reflected their emotions back to them in a way that made sense. You might not realize this while it is happening, but every moment of being overlooked becomes a silent message. Your feelings don't matter. Your voice doesn't matter. Your presence isn't important. And slowly, this message becomes a belief, then a habit, and eventually a personality. As you move through life with this invisible wound, you may find that self-doubt follows you everywhere. Not because you lack talent or strength, but because childhood taught you to question the legitimacy of your own experiences. When you were ignored long enough, your mind adapted by shrinking your needs, by suppressing your emotions, by convincing you that staying quiet was the safest choice. Psychologists call this internalized neglect, but spiritual wisdom reveals something deeper. When the soul is denied recognition, it begins to fracture, creating a fragile self-image that craves validation but feels unworthy of receiving it. That is why so many ignored children grow into adults who apologize for existing, who hide their accomplishments, who struggle to set boundaries, and who feel invisible even in crowded rooms. Jung understood this intimately, reminding us that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter. And this is exactly the prison an ignored child grows up inside, knowing they feel deeply, but never believing it is safe to express it. With each year, the patterns formed in silence become the script you unknowingly perform. You downplay your emotions because you once learned they would be dismissed. You hesitate to ask for help because you were taught you wouldn't receive it. You stay small because no one showed you how to take up space. And it isn't weakness, it is survival. The child who learned they were invisible simply became an adult who still doesn't know how to be seen. Inside, you lives that younger self, still carrying the belief that attention is dangerous, that needs are burdens, that love must be earned through silence and compliance. But the truth is that your soul was never meant to be diminished. You were never meant to live behind the shadow of neglect. And when you finally begin to understand how these wounds were formed, you also begin to see the path back to yourself, reclaiming the feelings you buried, acknowledging the worth you were denied, and giving yourself the validation, presence, and compassion that no one offered you when you needed it most. If this message resonates with you, declare it with confidence in the comments. I deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. 4. Coping mechanisms can appear as strengths, but hide pain. Coping mechanisms often look like strengths on the surface, but beneath them lies a quiet ache that began in childhood, when being ignored taught you that the only way to feel safe was to outperform your pain. Even though these traits make you appear capable and composed, they are rooted in wounds that were never given space to heal. Hyper-independence grows from a childhood where asking for help led to disappointment, teaching you that you must handle everything alone. People admire your self-sufficiency, but they do not see the exhaustion that comes from never feeling safe enough to lean on anyone. Perfectionism forms in the same silence, convincing you that if you do everything right, never cause problems, never show weakness, never make mistakes, then maybe you will finally be valued. Yet no matter how flawless you become, the fear of being overlooked lingers because the perfection was never for joy, only for survival. People-pleasing develops as a final layer of protection, shaping you into someone who bends around the needs and expectations of others. You become agreeable, helpful, and endlessly available because once long ago, wanting love or attention made you feel like a burden. So you learn to abandon yourself before anyone else could abandon you. Over time, these behaviors sink beyond personality into your nervous system, influencing how you breathe, how you walk into a room, and how you constantly scan for rejection before you even speak. This constant vigilance keeps you stuck in a loop where you overperform, overgive, and overthink, hoping someone will finally notice the pain beneath your strength. Yet the moment you recognize these behaviors as protective responses from a younger version of you who did their best to survive, something within you softens. This softening is the early step of spirituality and spiritual awakening. Because healing is not only a mental process, it is a reunion with the forgotten child inside who still longs to be seen without conditions. With awareness, you begin questioning the old rules that once governed your life. The belief that you must earn love through silence, perfection, or usefulness. Slowly, you start practicing gentle acts of rebellion against these outdated beliefs by saying no without guilt, asking for help without shame, resting without apologizing, and allowing yourself to be imperfect without fear. Each of these small choices is you learning to love yourself differently than the world once loved you. Over time, the coping mechanisms that once hid your pain begin to transform into healthier strengths. Your independence becomes self-trust instead of isolation. Your kindness becomes compassion instead of self-erasure. Your attention to detail becomes grounded excellence instead of anxious striving. By healing the ignored child within, you do not erase your past. You rewrite its meaning. You show your younger self that they were never too much or too unimportant to be noticed. And you build a life where your strength comes not from fear, but from love, awareness, and the deep inner safety you are finally learning to give yourself. 5. The ignored child becomes the invisible adult. The ignored child becomes the invisible adult. And when you have carried that silence for so many years, it shapes the way you move through life, quietly teaching you to dim parts of yourself just to feel safe. You may downplay your achievements without realizing it, brushing aside praise because being celebrated still feels foreign. And you may swallow your emotions out of habit, fearing that expressing them will lead to rejection the way it once did. You walk into conversations trying not to take up space. You hesitate before asking for help because your childhood taught you that needing anything made you a burden. And even in moments surrounded by others, you might feel a hollow emptiness inside, born not from loneliness, but from unmet needs that were never acknowledged when you were young. This inner emptiness can follow you into adulthood, influencing the jobs you choose, the relationships you accept, and the way you think about yourself. And without awareness, you may continue the cycle by ignoring your own feelings in the same way others overlooked you. Yet, the deeper truth is that this pattern is not a flaw in you, but a survival response that once helped you adapt to an environment where your emotional world had no place to land. The brain wires itself around what it repeatedly experiences, and when the experience is neglect, the mind learns to expect it, shaping beliefs that whisper, "Do not ask, do not feel, do not need." This is where spirituality and spiritual development begin to offer a path forward, inviting you to meet yourself with compassion instead of criticism, and to understand your wounds not as permanent scars, but as parts of your story that can be rewritten. When you begin to see your life as a journey of inner growth, rather than a reflection of what others failed to give you, you can begin nurturing the child within who longed for comfort and connection, offering yourself the warmth, patience, and attention you once needed so deeply. Through daily practice, you can slowly undo the inner pattern of invisibility by choosing small but powerful acts of self-recognition, pausing when you feel yourself shrinking, placing a hand over your heart when old fears resurface, or gently speaking truth into your own mind. My needs matter, my emotions are real, and I deserve to be seen. Over time, these moments become a new foundation, one where you no longer wait to disappear, but learn to take up space with confidence, honesty, and self-respect. The lesson you carry forward is clear. You are not the ignored child anymore, and you no longer need to silence yourself to feel safe. You are allowed to grow, allowed to heal, and allowed to step into a life where your presence is honored by others, and most importantly, by you. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel. And remember to turn on the notification bell so you never miss powerful insights like this. If this message resonates with you, type in the comments, "I am no longer invisible. I honor my worth." 6. Acknowledgement is a psychological necessity, not a luxury. You have to understand something fundamental. Acknowledgement is not a luxury in the life of a child. It is a psychological necessity that shapes the very foundation of identity. And when Carl Jung taught that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents, he was pointing directly at the silent wounds that form when a child grows up emotionally unseen. When you were small, you didn't just need food or shelter. You needed safety, stimulation, and connection. And connection was the heartbeat of your developing mind, because it told you, in the most subtle spiritual wisdom, that you existed in someone else's world. When that acknowledgement was missing, the absence did not simply fade. It shaped your brain, it shaped your sense of worth, and it shaped what you believed about love. Research shows that without consistent emotional recognition, neural pathways develop in a way that prepares a child for neglect rather than support. And slowly, quietly, you begin to expect dismissal everywhere you go. A child who is not acknowledged learns to shrink long before they learn to speak. They walk into rooms already assuming that their presence is too much. They enter friendships feeling like a burden, and they grow into adulthood carrying an unconscious script that whispers, Stay small so you don't get hurt. You may not notice it, but this becomes a lifelong pattern. You second-guess your ideas, you question your worth, and you celebrate nothing because you anticipate that no one will notice anyway. And this is not because you lack confidence. It is because your nervous system was taught that invisibility equals safety, and that emotional silence is easier than emotional rejection. Psychologists call this internalized neglect a schema, a mental blueprint created from repeated experiences of being overlooked. Over time, you learn not to ask for love, not to expect understanding, and not to believe that your needs matter. You grow up thinking that emotional connection is something other people deserve, not you. This is how the ignored child becomes the anxious adult, or the emotionally distant adult, or the high-functioning but deeply tired adult who carries wounds no one else sees. And yet, Carl Jung's teachings remind you that the shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that holds every unmet need, every silenced emotion, every truth you were afraid to claim, and it waits patiently until you are strong enough to turn toward it. When you look at this through the lens of spiritual wisdom, you realize something transformative. The ignored child inside you does not want attention. They want recognition. They want to be acknowledged the way they never were. They want someone finally to say, "You mattered then, and you matter now." And when you give yourself that acknowledgement, you begin a spiritual awakening, a return to wholeness. Because healing is not about changing the past, but about changing the meaning the past left inside you. You start rewiring your brain, soothing your nervous system, and rebuilding the emotional muscles that were never given the chance to grow. You step out of invisibility not because someone finally saw you, but because you learned to see yourself. 7. Healing begins with self-recognition and small acts of validation. Healing begins with self-recognition and the small, quiet acts of validating your own inner world. Because when you finally pause long enough to notice your emotions, your needs, and even your smallest victories, you begin giving yourself what no one ever gave that ignored child you once were. Transformation unfolds the moment you acknowledge the truth that your feelings were real all along. And by naming what you feel, instead of suppressing it, you slowly dismantle the old belief that your needs were a burden. As you gently turn toward yourself, spirituality becomes something lived rather than imagined, and your spiritual awakening deepens each time you consciously offer yourself the compassion you never received. This offering might look simple, a moment of rest when your body whispers for it, a small celebration of a quiet win, or a soft reminder that your worth does not depend on how much you endure. And with every one of these choices, you teach your nervous system that it no longer needs to brace for dismissal or rejection. Speaking up becomes an act of reclaiming yourself, because every time you say what you truly feel, you rewrite the old pattern that taught you to stay silent to stay safe. Setting boundaries becomes a sacred responsibility, not an act of rebellion, as you let your mind and body relearn what safety feels like. Affirming your worth retrains the part of you that once believed love had to be earned through self-sacrifice. And with each boundary you hold, each truth you speak, each moment you choose not to abandon yourself, you send a new message to your inner child. You are seen. You are worthy. You matter. Over time, these consistent acts of self-respect merge into a profound energetic shift. reminding you that your healing is not only psychological, it's spiritual. And as you continue honoring your needs rather than shrinking them, you discover that the ignored child within you does not disappear. Instead, they rise with you, learning step by step what it feels like to be protected, valued, and finally loved by the one person who is meant to show up all along you. If this message helped you understand how healing begins with self-recognition and small acts of validation, take a moment to support our work by liking this video and subscribing to Spiritual Wisdom. And if you're ready to start honoring your own worth, comment below. I choose to validate myself. Your voice helps us create content that truly serves you. 8. Breaking the silence creates generational change. Breaking the silence creates generational change. Because when you have lived through childhood neglect, you carry an inner world shaped by moments where your needs were dismissed, your voice was overlooked, and your presence felt invisible. Yet that same wound often becomes the birthplace of extraordinary empathy. You move through life hyper-aware of others' feelings, sensing subtle shifts in tone or energy, because you once had to read the emotional weather just to feel safe. And this sensitivity, although born from pain, becomes a quiet superpower that guides your healing and your spirituality. You may hesitate to speak up or take up space, still expecting someone to ignore you. But with each step toward therapy, self-reflection, or conscious parenting, you are breaking the old pattern that told you your needs did not matter. This healing journey is not just personal, it is a form of spiritual development. Because the moment you acknowledge your hurt, you reclaim your inner light, the part of you that always knew you deserved care, attention, and love. As you grow, you begin to understand that the child who was ignored learned to stay silent, not because they were weak, but because silence was survival. And now, as an adult, every act of self-expression becomes an act of rebellion against the past. You learn to name your emotions, to set boundaries, to say no when you need to. And each choice rewires the old belief that you are a burden. When you choose conscious parenting, whether with your own children or your own inner child, you refuse to repeat what hurt you, offering presence where there was once absence, offering patience where there was once dismissal, and offering tenderness where there was once confusion. And just like that, the cycle of emotional neglect begins to crumble, replaced by awareness, compassion, and connection. This transformation matters because healing yourself is not just about correcting the past, it is about shaping the future. When you allow yourself to be seen, when you speak the truth that was once locked inside you, when you let yourself receive the love you used to push away, you brighten the path for the next generation. You show them what emotional safety feels like, what visibility feels like, what unconditional support feels like. The ignored child you once were becomes the healer, the guide, the cycle breaker, proving that generational wounds can be rewritten. And from this journey emerge powerful lessons. You are allowed to exist fully. Your boundaries are valid. Your voice matters. Your sensitivity is strength. Seeking support is courage. And choosing healing is choosing a new lineage. Through this inner work, you become living evidence that silence does not have to be inherited, and that a neglected beginning can transform into a legacy of awareness, emotional wholeness, and spiritual awakening. In the end, the psychology of the ignored child reminds us that silence shapes the soul just as powerfully as words. When a child grows up unseen, they often learn to doubt their worth, to shrink themselves, and to expect neglect even long after childhood has passed. But awareness is the beginning of healing. When you recognize these patterns within yourself, you reclaim the right to be heard, to take up space, and to receive love without apology. If this message spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. Your journey of healing and awakening continues here. Carl Jung reveals the dark psychological meaning behind your dislike of cleaning the house. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. In today's video, we're diving into a surprising truth. Your dislike of cleaning the house isn't just procrastination. It may be a shadow message from your inner world, revealing emotions, wounds, and hidden parts of yourself that are asking to be seen. When you understand the psychological meaning behind the clutter around you, you begin to understand the clutter within you, and that awareness alone can transform your life, your energy, and your emotional freedom. As you listen, notice which insights resonate and ask yourself, what is my home trying to tell me about my inner state? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and share your own experience. Your perspective may help someone else on their journey. 1. Your home reflects your mind. Your home reflects your mind in ways far deeper than most people realize, because the physical space you live in is a mirror of your psyche, quietly revealing what the conscious mind avoids confronting. When Carl Jung spoke about the outer world being a symbolic expression of the inner world, he pointed directly to the truth that the environment you create around yourself is never accidental. The clutter on your table, the clothes draped over a chair, the dishes you keep telling yourself you will wash tomorrow. These are not simply tasks left undone. They are emotional signals. They represent the chaos, avoidance, and unprocessed feelings that sit beneath the surface of your awareness. The disorder becomes a physical expression of the unresolved conversations within you, the suppressed memories you do not want to revisit, and the lingering emotional weight you have not yet had the courage to lift. Avoiding cleaning, then, is not laziness, but an unconscious resistance to facing hidden parts of yourself, because every item out of place pulls on an emotional thread you may not be ready to follow. Dust, settling in the corners, mirrors the stagnant places in your inner world. Piles of clothes resemble identities you have tried on, outgrown, or abandoned, but never fully released. Unwashed dishes become symbols of emotional responsibilities you continue to postpone. Jung's insight that the unconscious always seeks expression becomes obvious the moment you pay attention to your environment, because everything you have avoided internally eventually manifests externally, asking you to notice what your spirit has neglected. This is why cleaning the house can trigger discomfort. It is not the physical labor, but the emotional confrontation. Every corner you touch forces you to acknowledge something within yourself. When you move objects, you disturb the stillness around memories you tried to ignore. When you throw things away, you symbolically release parts of your past. When you reorganize a space, You realign your internal world toward clarity. Cleaning becomes a quiet form of spirituality, a subtle spiritual awakening in motion, because it invites you to face your own energy rather than escaping it. Your home becomes a map of your emotional state, showing where you feel grounded, where you feel overwhelmed, and where your soul has been asking for renewal. As you begin to understand this, cleaning transforms from a chore into a dialogue with yourself. You start to see that restoring order outside helps restore order inside. Each surface you wipe becomes a clearing of stagnant emotions. Each object you place intentionally becomes a reaffirmation of who you are becoming. The act of creating cleanliness becomes a form of claiming your inner space again. And the more you engage with your environment consciously, the more your inner world responds by shifting from confusion to clarity, from heaviness to movement, from emotional resistance to emotional flow. Cleaning becomes not a task, but a symbolic healing ritual, a way of bringing light to the parts of your psyche that have remained in shadow for too long. So when you feel the resistance to clean, you can now recognize it as a message from the unconscious. The clutter is not mocking you, it is calling to you. Your home is trying to show you where you have been overwhelmed, where you have been avoiding yourself, and where something inside you is ready to transform. And as you gently bring order to your physical space, you open the door for your soul to follow, allowing your spirituality, your emotional clarity, and your spiritual awakening to rise naturally from within. If today's insight opened your eyes, comment below. I choose clarity to show your commitment to creating a home and a mind that truly supports your growth. 2. Mess as symbolic communication. When you begin to look at the space around you with deeper awareness, you realize that every unwashed dish, every pile of clothes left waiting, and every dusty corner is far more than a physical inconvenience. They are symbolic messages rising from the unconscious, forming a quiet psychological language that reveals what your inner world has been trying to say. The clutter becomes a subtle reflection of your emotional state, showing you exactly what you have postponed, avoided, or denied, because your home is not just where you live. It is an external expression of your inner landscape, shaped by your emotions, your memories, and the unresolved pieces of your past. Carl Jung often reminded us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And when you walk through your home, you can see this truth in action. The untouched stack of papers mirrors the decisions you feel afraid to confront. The neglected laundry reflects the responsibilities you feel unprepared to carry. And the dust lingering in the corners represents the emotions you have allowed to settle, because facing them feels heavier than ignoring them. As uncomfortable as it may be, what you refuse to clean is often the exact thing your soul is urging you to acknowledge, because the resistance is never about the task itself. It is about the meaning behind it. As you move through each room, you begin to understand that the mess is not judging you, but guiding you, showing you where your psyche feels overwhelmed or disconnected, and revealing the internal blocks interrupting your spiritual development. This is where spirituality becomes practical and personal, because tending to your environment becomes a form of self-dialogue, a way to face the parts of yourself that have been quietly asking for your attention. When you clean a closet, you are not just reorganizing objects, you are clearing mental space. When you wash dishes, you are rinsing away emotional residue from the day before. When you sweep the floor, you are symbolically sweeping away the stagnation inside you. These simple actions become transformative because they connect your physical world with your inner world, showing you that caring for your space is an act of caring for your soul. By seeing your home in this deeper psychological and spiritual way, you begin to approach clutter with compassion instead of shame. You start to understand that your environment is not a reflection of failure, but a map pointing toward the parts of you that need healing, grounding, and intentional attention. Cleaning becomes a spiritual practice, a quiet ritual of alignment where your hands move through physical objects while your mind softens and your heart opens. Each small task becomes a step toward harmony, revealing that spirituality is not something separate from ordinary life. It is woven into the way you create order, restore balance, and honor your inner state through the care of your outer world. And as you tend to your home with awareness and sincerity, you begin to notice how the act of cleaning helps you return to yourself more centered, more clear, and more connected to the deeper wisdom that has been trying to reach you through the language of your surroundings. 3. Cleaning as a Jungian ritual of transformation. To clean consciously is to step into a quiet ritual of rebirth, because every gesture you make is not just about organizing objects, but about releasing old energy that has settled into the corners of your life. When you lift a piece of clutter, when you wipe dust from a forgotten surface, you are not only restoring order, you are engaging in an intimate conversation with the parts of yourself you often overlook. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this is exactly why your home becomes a living reflection of your inner world. The mess you see outside is often the emotional and psychological weight that sits within you. Cleaning, when done with awareness, becomes a gentle yet powerful bridge between your conscious and unconscious mind, what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating your shadow and your light so you can reclaim your whole self. When you avoid cleaning, it is rarely laziness. It is a silent resistance to facing the parts of you that feel overwhelmed, unbalanced, or unresolved. Your environment holds memory. It holds unspoken stories. It holds emotional residue that you have not yet had the courage to acknowledge. So when you avoid wiping that counter or clearing that corner, you are not avoiding the task. You are avoiding the confrontation with your own inner chaos. Through the lens of spiritual wisdom, your home is not just a physical space. It is a symbolic extension of your psyche. And every object you ignore is a message your soul is waiting for you to read. But the moment you choose to clean with intention, the meaning shifts completely. Each movement becomes a quiet transformation of matter and meaning, because as you release the buildup in your outer world, you begin releasing the buildup within your inner world as well. You feel the shift long before the room is fully clean. The air becomes lighter, your thoughts become clearer, and your breath settles into a slower rhythm, as if your nervous system finally believes you are safe enough to let go. This is why cleaning can instantly change your emotional state. It reconnects the fragmented parts of you, reminding you that you are not powerless in the face of your own mind. As you continue, you start to see that chaos was never the enemy. It was simply unprocessed energy waiting to be witnessed. Conscious cleaning transforms the room, but more importantly, it transforms your relationship with yourself. You step into the role of the observer, the healer, the creator of your inner and outer space. With every item you put in its place, you integrate a piece of your shadow. With every corner you illuminate, you reclaim a piece of your clarity. With every decision you make, you remind your subconscious that you are present, awake, and willing to participate in your own transformation. And as you move through your home with this deeper understanding, cleaning becomes less of a chore and more of a spiritual conversation between who you have been and who you are becoming. You realize that order is not the goal. The goal is alignment, presence, and the courage to face the emotional dust that has settled inside you. And in that quiet, intentional movement, you embody the deepest message of Carl Jung's teachings, that true change begins not in the grand moments, but in the small, conscious acts through which you choose to meet yourself fully. If you're ready to turn cleaning into a Jungian ritual of transformation, comment below. I restore my inner space. Let this be your commitment to your own spiritual growth. 4. The archetype of purification. Cleaning has always carried the quiet echo of ancient purification rituals, where bathing, sweeping, or washing were never just chores, but symbolic acts of clearing psychic residue from the soul. Long before modern homes existed, people cleansed their spaces as a way of resetting their inner world, letting dust, water, and motion become messengers of emotional renewal. In this sense, your dislike of cleaning is not laziness. It is the psyche sensing that purification requires inner confrontation. And as Carl Jung taught, what you resist persists, meaning the more you avoid this symbolic cleansing, the more your inner clutter quietly grows. Water, in Jung's symbolic language, represents the unconscious with all its hidden emotions, unspoken memories, and dormant truths. This is why a simple shower can calm your mind more effectively than hours of thinking, because water washes not just the body, but the emotional field. When you clean with water, rinsing a cloth, wiping counters, or washing dishes, you are symbolically renewing the emotional layers within yourself. The moment water touches the surface, the unconscious begins its subtle shift, reminding you that emotional clarity and spiritual awakening often start with simple, physical actions that realign your inner world. Every repetitive motion in cleaning, folding, scrubbing, sweeping acts, like a moving meditation that settles the nervous system and slows the mind's noise. In temples around the world, monks sweep the ground slowly, not because it is dirty, but because the rhythm clears the mind. When your hands move in these patterns, your breathing steadies, your thoughts soften, and the body naturally enters a state of presence. This is why cleaning, when done without rushing or resentment, can feel strangely soothing, almost like the mind is exhaling. Yet the resistance arises because cleaning forces you to acknowledge parts of yourself you would rather avoid. Dust in the corner mirrors neglected emotions. Piles of clothes reflect postponed decisions. A cluttered room reveals a cluttered psyche trying to speak. Jung taught that your environment is a direct extension of your inner landscape, and this is why the room you avoid cleaning often represents the emotion you avoid feeling. Tidying becomes an emotional doorway, one that requires honesty, patience, and a willingness to release what no longer fits your current identity. But there is quiet power in this ritual. As you clear a surface, your thoughts become clearer. As you put things back where they belong, your energy begins to reorganize. As the room opens, your mind feels spacious again, making room for insight, creativity, and inner peace. Cleaning becomes a symbolic shedding of outdated energy, a way of preparing your inner temple for transformation. It is not the dust that weighs you down. It is the emotional stagnation stored inside it. In moments like this, spirituality is not something abstract or distant. It happens in the small gestures, the slow breaths, the subtle shifts. Each act of cleaning becomes an invitation to step deeper into your spiritual awakening, reminding you that healing does not always come through grand rituals. Sometimes it happens through the gentle movement of your hands as your inner and outer worlds slowly return to harmony. 5. Resistance and shadow work. When you resist cleaning your space, you are not simply avoiding a chore. You are confronting the ego's defense mechanism, a subtle psychological shield protecting you from seeing truths you are not yet ready to face. Carl Jung described this as shadow resistance, the unconscious pull that keeps you clinging to familiar chaos because change feels more threatening than disorder. Your mind convinces you that the mess is harmless, but every untouched corner reflects an untouched emotion. The clutter becomes a quiet hiding place where your unprocessed fears, disappointments, and doubts stay comfortably buried. Even when the room frustrates you, a part of you chooses it because it mirrors what your inner world has carried for years. As you move through your home, each pile of clothes, each stack of dishes, each layer of dust becomes a symbolic message written by your unconscious. The ego whispers that leaving things as they are is safer than confronting the discomfort that comes with transformation. Jung taught that the shadow does not ask for perfection. It asks for honesty. And honesty often begins in the smallest, most ordinary places. When you avoid cleaning, it is not laziness. It is a silent ritual of pain, a way of saying, I am not ready to move forward, without ever speaking the words aloud. In spirituality and spiritual development, this avoidance reveals where your inner light is blocked, where healing has not yet been allowed to enter. Shadow work invites you to look beyond the surface and see what the disorder is trying to tell you. Familiar chaos becomes a cocoon that protects you from the emotional clarity you secretly fear. A clean environment demands accountability. It forces you to see yourself without distraction. A messy one gives you permission to postpone growth. This is why the resistance feels so powerful. It protects the parts of you that are still fragile, unready to be exposed to the light. But the moment you acknowledge this, something shifts inside you. You stop fighting the mess as a problem and begin seeing it as a mirror. Each small action, a shelf wiped, a drawer organized, a floor cleared, becomes an act of reclaiming yourself. You are not just cleaning. You are declaring to your unconscious mind that you deserve order, clarity, and peace. You are gently telling your shadow, I am ready to see you. I am ready to heal. You begin to understand that the way you treat your space is the way you treat your emotional life. Chaos outside reflects chaos inside. And when you start bringing order to one, you naturally begin soothing the other. Your environment becomes a classroom for your spiritual development. Every corner holds a lesson. Every item you put back in its place reminds you that you too have a place within yourself that is waiting to feel settled. And every moment of resistance becomes an invitation, a chance to meet the shadow with compassion instead of fear. By recognizing the psychological meaning behind your reluctance, you step into deeper self-awareness. And as you soften into this awareness, the resistance loses its power. The space around you slowly transforms, and with it, so do you. If this insight on resistance and shadow work resonates with you, subscribe for more Carl Jung-inspired wisdom that turns everyday habits into powerful tools for inner transformation. 6. Cleaning as self-worth and healing. Many people think resistance to cleaning comes from laziness, but when you look closer through the lens of spiritual wisdom and the teachings of Carl Jung, you realize it often comes from a much deeper wound, low self-worth, the quiet belief that you do not deserve a peaceful or orderly space. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this truth becomes painfully clear when you avoid cleaning, because the clutter in your home begins to mirror the clutter inside your heart. When you walk past a pile of clothes or ignore the dishes in the sink, you are not just avoiding a task, you are avoiding a part of yourself, a part that has forgotten it deserves clarity, beauty, and breathing room. This is why, the moment you pick something up with intention, your soul feels it immediately. Something wakes up inside you, as if your inner self whispers, "You are choosing to live again." Cleaning, then, stops being a chore and becomes an act of self-respect, a sacred declaration that you are worthy of renewal, and every small movement becomes a gentle reminder that you still want something better for your life. As you continue, you begin to notice something strange but powerful. Your energy shifts. You breathe a little deeper. You stand a little taller. You begin to reclaim parts of yourself that you abandoned when you stopped believing you were worthy of peace. Carl Jung taught that the soul speaks through symbols, and your home is one of the clearest mirrors of your unconscious mind. A messy room becomes a map of stagnation, a sign of emotional exhaustion, or even a quiet protest against a life that has felt too heavy. But when you move with purpose, even in small steps, you break the spell. You remind your unconscious that you deserve care, you deserve order, and you deserve to feel alive within the walls of your own life. Cleaning becomes a sacred ritual of dignity, not a punishment. It becomes the moment you tell your past pain, "You do not control me anymore." With every item put in its place, you rebuild your vitality. With every corner you clear, you make space for new energy, new clarity, and new beginnings. Jung believed that healing does not always come from grand breakthroughs. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through simple daily acts that reconnect you with your forgotten worth. As you clean, you are not just restoring your home, you are restoring yourself. You are choosing to honor your spirit. You are choosing to awaken to your value. And when you begin to feel that shift, even just a little, you start to understand that cleaning is not merely a task. It is an intimate journey back to the truth that you deserve peace, you deserve beauty, and you deserve a life that reflects the strength and light you carry within. 7. The home as a living temple. Your home is more than a physical structure. It is a quiet, breathing extension of your soul, reflecting truths about you long before you speak them. Carl Jung often reminded us that the outer world mirrors the inner one, and nowhere is this more visible than in the space you live in each day. The walls hold your unspoken emotions. The arrangement of your belongings reveals the rhythm of your inner life, and the energy of each room reflects a different part of the psyche you may not always acknowledge. When you step into the kitchen, you are entering the symbolic hearth of your personal power, the place where nourishment and energy are created. The way you maintain it often speaks to how you handle your own inner fire, whether you tend to it with care, ignore it out of exhaustion, or push it aside because facing that power feels overwhelming. As your eyes move toward the windows, you're not just looking at pieces of glass, but at symbols of truth, insight, and illumination. Clean, open windows reflect a mind willing to receive clarity. Covered or clouded windows suggest the opposite, a hesitation to let in the light of awareness, to see yourself without filters or excuses. Every forgotten corner and every neglected surface speaks a psychological language of its own. What appears to be a pile of clothes or scattered objects may actually be fragments of unresolved emotions, delayed decisions, and inner conflicts you haven't had the strength to face yet. Jung's insight that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, becomes painfully clear here. Your home quietly reveals the stories your mind tries to ignore. When chaos accumulates in your environment, it signals that chaos has begun to weave itself into your thoughts. And when order returns to the outside, peace begins stitching itself slowly back into your inner world. An aligned home creates an aligned psyche. When your surroundings are balanced, your nervous system relaxes, your mind becomes sharper, your emotions flow more gently, and your spirit feels supported. This is why cleaning is not merely a practical task, but a symbolic ritual of reclaiming your inner alignment. Each time you clear space, you clear energy. Each time you organize, you gather scattered parts of yourself. Each time you bring order, you tell your inner world, I am ready to return to myself. As you move through your home, your living temple, you participate in a subtle yet profound act of healing. The environment responds to your intention, and you respond to its transformation in return. This dance between inner and outer worlds is not accidental. It is a part of spirituality, a step on the path of spiritual awakening, where your surroundings become a mirror of your consciousness. When you treat your home as a sacred extension of your being, you begin to feel how every shift in your space echoes a shift inside you. And the more lovingly you tend to that space, the more effortlessly your spirit begins to rise. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any powerful insights like this. And if you're ready to honor your home as the sacred temple of your inner world, type in the comments, "My home reflects my highest self." 8. Integration. From shadow to wholeness. When you explore the idea of cleaning through Carl Jung's perspective, you begin to see that this simple act is really a form of inner integration. Because every time you clean, you are not just organizing objects, you are quietly bringing your light and your darkness back into harmony. Jung taught that whatever you avoid externally mirrors something unresolved internally. So when you resist cleaning, it is not because you lack discipline. It is because a part of your unconscious is revealing what feels scattered, heavy, or forgotten within you. Cleaning becomes a living symbol of the inner sorting process that spirituality and spiritual development always demand. Deciding what memories to release, which emotions need attention, which beliefs no longer belong, and which aspects of yourself are ready to be reclaimed. When you pick up a single item and return it to its place, you are practicing the same inner movement of putting your emotional life back into order. When you clear a surface, you are clearing mental fog. When you sweep a floor, you are sweeping the parts of your psyche that are asking for renewal. Because of this, cleaning is never about creating a perfect home. It is about healing through awareness, about letting matter and mind move in synchronicity instead of conflict. Your house does not need to be flawless, but it becomes a mirror that speaks to you, showing the exact state of the relationship between your consciousness and your soul. A cluttered corner reflects a cluttered emotion you have put off. A disorganized room mirrors a part of you that feels ungrounded. A task you keep avoiding reveals a truth you are not ready to face. Jung's famous reminder, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate," reveals its full power here. Because the more you avoid your environment, the more your inner world stays untouched, unintegrated, waiting for you to finally look at it. Cleaning then becomes a gentle form of shadow work, not dramatic or overwhelming, but steady, grounding, and deeply human. When you clean with awareness, you start noticing how your energy shifts. The air feels lighter, your chest loosens, your mind becomes quiet enough to hear yourself again. This is the real transformation, the subtle restoration of the connection between your inner self and the physical space you live in. The act of cleaning becomes a spiritual ritual, simple, practical, and powerful, showing you that healing often begins with small movements. And as you continue, you learn that integration is not about erasing the darkness inside you, but about understanding it, accepting it, and giving it a rightful place so that your entire being can breathe in unity. And when you finish, even if it is just one drawer, one table, or one corner, you feel that something inside has shifted too. You sense clarity, calmness, and alignment returning to you. You realize the real goal has never been a perfect house, but a restored relationship between your consciousness and your soul. A moment of inner harmony that tells you your outer world and inner world are no longer fighting each other, but finally walking together again. 9. Final lesson: presence as the true ritual. When you finally understand yourself through the lens of spiritual wisdom and the insights of Carl Jung, you begin to realize that transformation never arrives in grand, dramatic moments, but in the quiet decision to act with intention. It begins when you choose to clean one surface, clear one drawer, or restore one small corner of your home, because these simple actions are far more symbolic than they appear. Jung famously reminded us, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this truth becomes strikingly clear the moment you notice how your resistance to cleaning is not about laziness, but about the emotions, memories, or internal chaos that these tasks quietly expose. A messy room is often a reflection of a cluttered mind, and every time you avoid tidying, you are unconsciously avoiding something within yourself that you don't want to confront. Yet the moment you choose to act, even in a tiny way, something shifts. Wiping a table or organizing a drawer becomes more than a household chore. it becomes the first sign of internal alignment. Energy softens, your mood becomes lighter, and you feel a subtle sense of grounding as if your inner world recognizes the change. Scientists have long said that our physical environment shapes our neural patterns, and spiritual teachers echo this through generations, reminding us that outer order triggers inner renewal. When you take a deep breath and return to the present moment while cleaning, you give your mind a chance to reset, recalibrate, and reconnect to a calmer rhythm. William James once said, "The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another." And choosing to clean consciously is exactly that, a choice to interrupt chaos with clarity. As you move through your space with intention, presence becomes its own form of prayer. You start to feel how the very act of attending to your environment is also attending to your soul. Instead of rushing through the task or resenting it, you begin to honor it. Each motion becomes slower, softer, and more aware. The simple act of folding a piece of clothing or returning an object to its place becomes a quiet ritual of grounding yourself back into your life. In this way, presence transforms an ordinary moment into something sacred. It reminds you that you are capable of shaping your inner world through the outer one, and that healing is often found in places you overlook. And when you stay with that presence long enough, you realize that attention is the first prayer, and presence is the only ritual. Cleaning becomes a practice of meeting yourself exactly where you are, not running from the chaos, not numbing the discomfort, but gently facing it. Through every mindful movement, something inside you begins to reorganize itself too. Your energy becomes clearer, your emotions settle, and a softer, steadier version of yourself emerges. This is the rebirth that happens quietly, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through the simple, intentional act of returning to what is right in front of you and choosing to bring order, clarity, and awareness into it. When you finally understand that your home mirrors your inner world, you begin to see that avoiding the mess was never about laziness. It was about listening to the parts of yourself you've been afraid to face. As Carl Jung taught, the outer disorder often reflects an inner conflict waiting to be acknowledged, healed, and transformed. And once you recognize this truth, every small act of cleaning becomes an act of reclaiming your peace, your clarity, and your power. If this message from spiritual wisdom brought you insight, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Your journey to deeper awareness continues from here.